Well, good morning. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Anissa Cornelius, and my family and I have been a part of Sojourn Grace Collective since 2016. So I'm mother of 4 incredible humans and that I gave birth to. I'm also a birth worker. So for me, that includes being a birth and postpartum doula, a childbirth educator, and a midwife assistant. I spend my days and a lot of my nights supporting families emotionally, and educationally, and informationally, physically, through their pregnancies, birth, and after their babies are born. I teach classes on childbirth and what to expect after a baby arrives. I help families transition and I help them build a support system. So a question I get a lot is, what's the difference between a midwife and a doula? People don't know that, right? So I'll just answer it for you. A midwife provides medical care during pregnancy and the postpartum period, as well as immediate newborn care. In out-of-hospital birth, like a freestanding birth center or a home birth, they would take the place of an OBGYN. In a hospital setting, they might work alongside of an OB. It just depends. And a doula is a non-medical support person. They offer support through information as well as mental, emotional, and sometimes physical and spiritual support. They're a continuous support person, and they often are the only consistent person a family sees through pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, specifically in a hospital setting. So midwives and doulas, they work together to make sure birthing families feel safe and supported on their birth journeys. So what does this have to do with anything? Well, it should come to no surprise to you that we're having a moment in our country. The death of George Floyd and his cry for his mama, as well as other deaths that have not seen justice, have sparked a fire that honestly has been raging for hundreds of years. People are learning to see, they're learning to listen and take note of injustice that's been around for longer than we've been alive. I imagine as you've embarked on your own anti-racist work, you've begun to see that there are numerous areas where systemic racism is rampant and it needs to be dismantled. Some you may have known about, others may yet to be uncovered for you. Well, recently, you may have heard the term reproductive justice or birth equity and wondered what those phrases mean, or maybe you've been hearing them for years. But before we talk about how we fix things, maybe you don't even know how it's broken. We have to talk about maternal mortality rates. We have to talk about how birthing people are dying in America. So what does systemic racism look like in maternity care? Well, when people think about dying in childbirth, they don't often think about the United States. I know I didn't. I just assumed that was happening in some poor developing country that my evangelical upbringing taught me we were supposed to be saving. Insert eye roll here. That's not the case. Hopefully I don't lose you, but I'm going to in the numbers here, but I'd like to share a few with you. In the United States, currently, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from childbirth-related complications than their white counterparts. Native American and Alaskan Native women die at a rate 2.5 times greater than white women. These numbers have been unchanged for decades. When the U.S. began to improve their maternal infant mortality rates, it actually made the racial disparity more obvious because the birthing people it got better for was white women. The same study by the CDC reported that 700 women died each year between 2011 and 2015, and that 3 out of 5 of those deaths those pregnancy-related deaths were preventable. And then there's what we call near misses. These are the cases where the birthing person survives after a life-threatening, complicated pregnancy and birth. Oftentimes, mother blaming or blaming poor reproductive health outcomes on individual Black women seeks to make excuses that families are poor or uneducated, or they didn't receive the proper prenatal care, that they just didn't go to their prenatal appointments. But that's not always true. One study that took place in New York City showed that Black women living in the wealthiest neighborhoods are still 4 times more likely to have a near miss than white women in poor areas. And college-educated Black women were 2 times as likely to have complications than white women that didn't graduate high school. Remember, these near-miss events are still life-threatening complications. These are the birth horror stories that you hear. And we say, well, at least you have a healthy baby. True, but what a trauma-bearing beginning to such a beautiful relationship. Many of these complications are due to cardiovascular conditions, severe bleeding, and extreme hypertension. Many times in women who are deemed low risk and healthy prior to birth. So how are Black women dying at such an alarming rate of preventable conditions? As researchers collect stories from Black women, they're finding that there are common themes of feeling dismissed, difficult, and unimportant. Chronic stress of the Black experience in America, fear of what bringing little Black boys and girls into this world may mean, not being listened to, being misdiagnosed by dismissive healthcare providers, having assumptions made about you and your situation. All of these contribute to this constant storm of stress that can lead to these high maternal mortality rates. In a New York Times article, Linda Villarosa explains, for Black women in America, an inescapable atmosphere of societal and systemic racism can create a kind of toxic physiological stress, resulting in conditions that lead directly to high rates of infant and maternal mortality. When tennis star Serena Williams shared her story of being brushed off about potentially fatal blood clots, and in fact had a pulmonary embolism, it served as a reminder that wealth plays no factor when you're being dismissed. Even a star athlete who's very clearly in tune with her body had to advocate to get the medical attention she needed. Recent studies in racial bias among physicians reveal that there are physicians who believe that Black skin is actually physically thicker than white skin and that Black bodies are simply stronger and have a higher pain threshold. Can we see how problematic this is in birth and listening to birthing people who may need pain relief or interventions? Researcher and OBGYN Dr. Karen Scott put it this way. What is happening to Black mothers in this country is not an accident. We have developed health disparities precisely due to historical and ongoing segregation and bias in medicine and society. The American Medical Association actively fought against desegregation in medical facilities and was slow to join the movement for Black civil rights. The racial disparity in maternal mortality and morbidity is the direct result of behaviors and attitudes adopted by and enforced by the forefathers of U.S. medicine through the American Medical Association, American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and other national organizations. This is systemic racism in birth. So then what is reproductive justice? Well, the term was coined back in 1994. One of my favorite organizations, Sister Song, describes reproductive justice as the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, to have children, to not have children, and to parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. It's not just about birth. It's about abortion and parenting and birth and choosing how and where you birth. It's about access to care, holistic and unbiased care, access to information about our bodies, about our health. It's about the right to informed choice and consent. It's about birth equity. So birth equity means that Black, Indigenous, people of color, and the LGBTQ community are assured conditions for optimal birth experiences. It looks like having concerns be heard rather than dismissed as dramatic. Having access to doula support that looks at the whole person, that takes into account a person's life and work and environment. It means access to the midwifery model of care, appointments that are an hour long because your care providers want to get to know you and provide you with individualized care that takes into account your environmental stressors and your family life. It means that Black people have access to care providers that look like them. Representation matters. Why? Because the lived body of lived body experience of Black people matters. Birthing people ought to have access to a care provider who shares their experience, who will listen to their own wisdom about their bodies, and that will understand that being Black in America will have a profound influence on how they view themselves and how they felt they were treated. We know that one way to reduce racial disparities in childbirth is greater use of midwives, specifically Black midwives. Currently, Black midwives make up less than 2% of the midwives in our country. Of course, midwifery care can cost anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000 for a family. So how do we make it both affordable for families and make sure that midwives can make a living wage? Midwives play a critical role in improving care and outcomes for Black families. My own midwife caught life-threatening conditions during my pregnancy that were dismissed by other healthcare providers. Midwife Shafia Monroe says one of the darkest moments in U.S. history was the systematic eradication of the African-American midwife from her community, resulting in a legacy of birth injustices. So what does this have to do with our faith community? Well, I suppose one could argue that it doesn't have anything to do with our faith community, but I assume by now you know that I don't think that's true. Churches in our nation have been notorious for being on the wrong side of justice and equity. At Sojourn, our values of inclusivity and peace, our commitment to see families thrive and follow the Spirit as she leads us to fight injustice, means we seek out problems so that we can be part of the solutions. We value loving ourselves so we can give love away. When it comes to dismantling systematic racism, what does love look like? I'm glad to be part of a community committed to doing the work of racial justice for my family, for your family, and for future families that may join us. So what am I doing about it? Well, back in 2014, I started working with young families, teen parents to be precise. I would strap my chunky baby on my back and show up at the alternative school and eat lunch with the most amazing kids that I'd ever met. Some of them would take the bus to school or they'd get a ride and they'd drop their babies off at the school daycare so they could graduate high school. Sometimes we would feed them pizza and they always wanted to know what the catch was. There was no catch, just free pizza. But a mentor was available if they wanted one. They oohed and awed over my baby and showed me pictures of theirs. I rode on a bus full of teen girls and their babies down to the middle of nowhere, Texas, and we ate camp food and we swam and we slept in bunk beds and we would talk. Well, they would talk and I would listen. I started thinking about how much support I had and how hard it was for me to parent my, at the time, one baby. If I needed that much support, what about these amazing young parents? What $300 birth class were they taking? Who's paying for their $1,000 doula? Because I'm dropping diapers off midweek so they can make it to their next paycheck from their minimum wage job. Who's buying formula because a nurse made assumptions about their situations and gave them zero information about breastfeeding, and so they didn't think they could do it? Let alone information about pumping or baby wearing or bonding or what on earth happens to your body for 6 weeks after you have a baby. Of course, at 6 weeks postpartum, they've been back to work and school for 4 weeks. Likely having been pushed to have birth control that would have tanked their milk supply anyway, and no information about warning signs, blood pressure, or newborn life. The system is clearly broken. So what do you do with an idea? You become a trained doula and a certified birth educator, and you make sure teen parents have access to information and care. Okay, well, that's what I did. I put my money where my heart was, and I started an organization called Regarding Hope. We provide comprehensive childbirth education, doula support, and postpartum mentorship for teen parents aged 13 to 22. After hearing stories of how these young parents' labors and births went, how they didn't have much, if any, postpartum support, I thought, what if from the beginning we just encouraged these young parents? Growing up in a church culture that made teen pregnancy the ultimate sin meant anyone that found themselves with a growing belly was humiliated and ostracized. which is quite ironic coming from a religion that hinges on an unwed teenage brown girl having a baby that would save them. When I saw these amazing, resilient kids, I didn't have pity on them. I just kept thinking, what if they were just as empowered as I was by my doulas to tell the nurses they wanted to breastfeed? What if they demanded skin to skin in the first hour so they could bond with their baby because they knew the benefits? What if they knew they had choices in birth and could advocate for themselves and their families? What if they had someone to call at 2 a.m. when their babies had a fever? This is how Regarding Hope was born, out of the desire to see young families thrive from the very beginning. Can you see it? This is just the tiniest part of birth equity, of reproductive justice, of making sure Black families and young parents have access to what they need to thrive as a family. In the foreword of Color of Compromise, hip-hop artist Lecrae writes, "Education should lead to informed action, and informed action should lead to liberation, justice, and repair." So, in the name of equity, we take what would typically cost upwards of $2,000 and we give it away. We level the playing field. In fact, that same historical survey author Jamar Tisby writes, "Historically, when faced with a choice between racism and equality, the American church has tended to practice a complicit Christianity rather than a courageous Christianity. They chose comfort over constructive conflict, and in doing so, created and maintained a status quo of injustice." Faith family, we can do better than that. I imagine many of you want to know what to do next. I get that. It's hard to know what we should do or not do the more we know. I invite you to sit with how uncomfortable that is, how uncomfortable it all is at first. Recognize how not shocked by statistics or stories of racism your Black and brown brothers and sisters are. Tired? Yes. Shocked? No. And then work to dismantle the systems. Where we put our money, otherwise known as what we fund, in your organizations, in government, in your work, how we vote on budgets, all these things matter. I like to remind people, no one is asking you individually to do everything. Could you likely do more than you are now? Well, I can't answer that question for you, but I know that if we want to see change, we have to ask ourselves hard questions. James Baldwin said it like this: "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." So keep listening and learning. Keep reading and sharing. Support organizations that are doing anti-racist work. Talk about it with other people. The time for uncomfortable conversations is here. If you're looking for ways to make change locally, I can share a few. So there are currently only 4 Black midwives in San Diego County. One of them is a friend of mine. Her name is Nikki Helms, and she's opening a birth center that I plan to be a part of. You can help fund it, you can share the work, and you can look into other ways to contribute to this amazing vision that will serve so many young families. Young families, Black families, we're looking to make change in our city. Nizhoni Institute of Midwifery is raising money to help more Black, Indigenous people of color be able to afford tuition. You can contribute to their fund. And of course, as we continue to connect with teen parents here in San Diego, you can help Regarding Hope by spreading the word that we exist, or by contributing financially through donations to help fund support and education and operating costs. Take a deeper look at what reproductive justice could look like. Take the time to learn about the history of birth in our country. Listen to stories of birthing people and believe them. Support birth choice and support birth with your dollars, with your platforms, and your vote. I plan to keep working to make sure that racial disparities in our country are lessened. I hope you'll join me as we continue to make sure that the world is a safe place to birth and raise all our children.